Welcome back to the channel. The ECW debut on pay-per-view was definitely historic. Let's dive into the Observer from when it happened. April 21, 1997 Wrestling Observer Newsletter. ECW pay-per-view historical debut. Ogawa debut. MMA group out of business. More. By Observer staff. The debut of Extreme Championship Wrestling on pay-per-view on April 13 is now history, and perhaps even historical. The show was a very slightly toned-down version of the product, with a high work rate, a few, well, not death-defying but certainly injury-defying spots, some sloppiness and nervousness, several booking swerves, a few technical problems, some excellent matches, and undoubtedly the best pregame show for a pay-per-view in the history of the business. In the end, the show was stolen by the two oldest performers on the show, the first one of pro wrestling's bona fide legends, and the other one of the most underrated enduring great workers in the history of the industry. Terry Funk, a few months shy of his 53rd birthday, came out with a stellar dramatic performance in a triangle match, winning over Stevie Richards and Sandman to get a title match that took place immediately thereafter, and then bled heavily and sold big in a short swerve-laden main event which ended with him coming out of the ring as new ECW World Heavyweight Champion. In the pregame show, they aired an incredible taped promo of him at his father's grave site talking about winning the title. Actually the best worker on the show, amazingly enough, since he was in a match doing a style that isn't exactly geared for someone who is past 30, let alone 44, was Gran Hamada, the undersized Japanese star who became a lighter weight major star in Mexico in the late 70s. Hamada is one of the few survivors who has remained a top worker from the original class that put junior heavyweight wrestling on the map in Japan in the early 1980s original Tiger Mask era. Actually, the only other survivor as a top star from that era is Bret Hart. Hamada has always been something of an unsung star in the business, his prime coming during a period when people of his size weren't given breaks, and a real rarity in that how often does someone make noticeable improvements as a worker updating his style between the ages of 43 and 44? And because he was part of a cold match in that it was guys thrown in with no storyline, and since the star of the show and only person who appeared to really be known to the fans was Great Sasuke, he came out of a pay-per-view show where he was the best worker, almost totally unsung once again. He's probably held more major lighter weight world titles than all but a few wrestlers that have ever lived, somewhere in the vicinity of names like Danny Hodge, Ray Mendoza, and Pero Aguayo, all bona fide legendary Hall of Fame performers. And Hamada was a far better worker than any of the men mentioned above. But as a Japanese wrestler who was too small for Japan in his youth, and made too many enemies due to some questionable business in his 30s, has now become a small promotion main eventer after basically retiring from his second home in Mexico, and is surviving past 40 on more than just reputation, doing the one thing most veteran performers don't do, adapting the 90s style into his repertoire rather than relying on what he did in his youth and mental acuity to get him through. When it was over, the show had to be considered a major success aesthetically for ECW. It was far from perfect, and the flaws many talk about with the promotion were more than evident, but when it was over, the strong points overwhelmed the weak points. Very preliminary buy rates estimates at press time with less than 10% of the systems reporting were in the 0.2 range, were probably about 26,000 buys and an estimated total company revenue of $210,000. Break-even was between $350,000 and $400,000. Which, due to the limited number of homes available because so many major systems refused to carry the show, would be a money loser as a show itself. ECW had to request a certain number of buys to get them to carry the show. Paul Heyman was expecting that going in and was majorly downplaying the show's chances of being a money maker and claiming it was more as a way to put on a show with a product content that would get those who didn't carry the first show into changing their position for the future. Some of the losses could be offset in the future by eventual videotape sales and from the live gate. As a first show, it appeared to do from a buy rate standpoint, which is a fair comparison. Total homes wouldn't be, if the early figures are a national indication, well below the debuts of such groups as UWFI, Pancrase and EFC, none of which succeeded on pay-per-view. It would be slightly less than AAA, which also never got a second show, but that was more due to disorganization than anything else. However, all the aforementioned groups that are no longer around saw buy rates decline significantly after the first show, which is the general pattern for most events on pay-per-view. UFC, which debuted in 1993 with 80,000 buys, Pro Boxing and Major League Pro Wrestling are the notable exceptions, although all three have suffered consistent gradual declines as a pattern in recent years. There is a good chance ECW would fall into the category of exceptions, and if the second show on August 17th were able to clear the vast majority of the cable universe and maintain in 0.2, it would break even or show a small profit to the point it could stay in the game. Meetings with Cablevision and Viewer's Choice, both of which didn't carry this show, are expected soon. A decline in buy rate on a second show would make it difficult to continue on pay-per-view. But keep in mind any figures this early are preliminary at best, to alarm pay-per-view carriers to the point they won't carry the second show. The angles and problems that led to the first show only being available in around half the pay-per-view universe have largely been rectified. A second show was announced for August 17th, which Heyman said will be from a larger building likely in a major market that ECW hasn't run in the past. Heyman is steering clear of running a major show within the New York City limits because of the political climate and because he realizes as a small fish playing with the big fish that he can't afford to make enemies right now. Joey Styles, doing his first live broadcast, doing the show solo almost completely. Tommy Dreamer and Beulah McGillicuddy sat in during the final two matches, but Beulah said literally nothing and Dreamer might as well have was somewhere in the range of very good to great, getting over all the key points, getting enough storyline over for first-timers, and not only calling the key spots but getting the individual Japanese wrestlers over as more than simply nameless, faceless clones, as several of the major promotion announcers do routinely when foreign talent is imported. The booking was excellent. The camera work wasn't, particularly early. The guys busted their asses, but there was far more sloppiness than you'd ever see on a major promotion big show. There was heavy juice by Funk, but the juice wasn't used so often on the show that it became a cliché. There were a few swear words limited to 3, all of which were presented in a script beforehand weeks ago to request. No F word, and overall the language was kept pretty much inoffensive. The only woman beating was a woman beating a man, Reggie Bennett attempting, and not quite succeeding, a powerbomb on Funk. There was some knocking of WWF and WCW, but not a whole lot. Some aspects of the show technically looked second-rate, but when the show was over, it was better overall than the vast majority of WWF and WCW shows. The show drew a sellout of 1,250 to the ECW arena, which was given a facelift and cleaned up with a new paint job, plus they had a new ring with ECW Hardcore Wrestling written on the canvas. The show sold out a few days in advance. The gate had to destroy any previous company records, probably well in excess of $60,000 with 320 tickets at $100 and about 900 others at $40. The show also set a company merchandise record doing just under $20 per head, which is an unheard of figure for almost anything short of a Tokyo Dome show. In the first dark match, Louis Spicolli, Louis Mucciolo, pinned Balls Mahoney, John Rickner, in about 5 minutes of what was said to have been a decent but rushed match. Chris Chetty and mystery partner J.T. Smith, Don Smith, beat Little Guido, James Stone, and Tommy Richardson, in another rushed match. Smith got a surprisingly huge pop returning to ECW against the FBI gimmick that he pretty much started. The show opened with Joey Styles in the ring with sound problems on the mic. The Dudleys came out and the crowd began chanting "Fuck you Devon," which was as dirty as the language was going to get. Devon, instead of his trademark "shut the F up," toned down to "shut the hell up," kind of letting us know this show was going to be under control. Joel Gertner did the ring introductions for this match doing his heel gimmick, which is actually mimicking how Michael Buffer announces minus the trademark "let's get ready to rumble" phrase that Buffer will and has sued others over using. 1. The Eliminators, Perry Sotelo and George Kazao, regained the ECW tag titles from the Dudleys, Mark LaMonica and Devin Hughes, in 6-11. The idea of this match was simply to showcase the Eliminators and to keep repeating the best tag team in the world phrase so much that people actually believe it. This was similar in substance to a combination squash match and lucha match with green flyers. The Eliminators' moves were out of this world, and the Dudleys were good in their role, which was simply to catch them and take the moves without anyone getting hurt. Actually, that didn't quite happen, as Bubba Ray Dudley suffered a broken ankle, the only serious injury of the show, and was hospitalized that night. He's currently on crutches and will be fitted for a cast this week. The transitions between moves were awful, so if you are judging it as an indie match it was great, and as a major promotion match it was bad. In some ways, that is apropos of a lot of ECW. The Eliminators opened doing the total elimination on signed Guy Dudley. Lots of combination kicks by Eliminators. At one time they both did simultaneous double flip splashes off the top rope. Saturn did his Saturn Sue, which is a moonsault elevated by Cronus over the top outside the ring. Cronus then followed doing a space-flying tiger drop. Saturn did a springboard spin kick. Cronus did a round off into an elbow called Hurricane Cronus. Saturn did his elbow drop off the top rope where he gets amazing elevation. Saturn did a double springboard quebrada onto Bubba. Cronus used a Scorpio splash on Devon, which was really impressive given his size. They finished doing front and back kicks onto Devon and a total elimination on Bubba, and Saturn pinned Bubba. Joel Gertner then announced that the Dudleys won on points and were still champions, and the Eliminators gave Gertner the total elimination. 2 3/4 stars. Sandman then did a taped interview hitting himself in the head until he opened up a small cut. Chris Condito came out live with his arm in a sling and said he'd be out of action for another 6 weeks. He said he was on the first show ever in the building in 1993 and wanted to wrestle on this show. He said last year at this time he was at WrestleMania with Dr. Tom and his girl, whose name he can't mention because Vince hasn't given clearance, and they won the WWF Tag Team titles, and said he'd be back out later in the show. 2. Rob Van Dam. Robert Tchaikovsky pinned Lance Storm, Lance Evers in 10-10. Another move fest. Fans chanted "You sold out" at Van Dam since he's believed to be WCW bound, and they are working an angle off that until he leaves. Van Dam did a running somersault plancha to the floor. He then did a leg drop off the top rope for a near fall. Storm vaulted to the top in one motion and came back with an elbow drive. Van Dam was out of the ring, but Storm missed a pescado and crashed on the floor. Van Dam threw photographer Bill Apter out of the way and did a moonsault block off the guard rail, and in the ring threw a chair hard into Storm's face. He held the chair and did a drop kick. Van Dam did a double arm pancake drop and a frog splash off the top for a near fall. Van Dam threw another chair at Storm's head and missed a somersault block. Storm came back with a suplex onto a chair and followed with a few more flying moves. Van Dam leapt over the top with a slingshot into a leg drop with Storm's throat draped over the apron. Storm came back with a weak chair shot that the fans booed heavily. He then did another which elicited even more boos, because if you're not going to kill someone with a chair in ECW, there is no point in even picking the chair up. Storm came off the top with a leg drop with Van Dam's face on the chair. Van Dam then tripped while trying an elbow drive and the fans chanted "You fucked up." Storm came back with a German suplex and more weak chair shots, eliciting even more boos. Finally Van Dam did his spot where the other guy holds the chair and he kicks the chair into the guy's face, and did a backward round off onto him for the pin. They were having a pretty good match, but killed it with the missed spots right near the finish. After the match the fans chanted to Van Dam "You sold out." Van Dam said he swallowed his pride to appear on this show as a second line fill-in for injured Condito, which was a shoot, as Van Dam didn't want to appear on this show because he felt insulted he wasn't part of the original lineup. He said he swallowed his pride because with a win on this way he'd be worth more money either here or, as he emphasized, elsewhere. 2.5 stars. 3. Great Sasuke, Masanori Murakawa, and Gran Hamada, Hiroaki Hamada, and Masato Yakashiji beat Men's Takeo Otsuka, and Dick Togo, Shigeki Sato, and Takamichi Noku, Takao Yoshida, in 1655. The second best pay-per-view match thus far in 1997. This is the typical nightly main event match for the Michinoku Pro Wrestling promotion, which promotes mainly small towns in northeastern Japan. Joey Styles compared it to a Japanese version of ECW, and it is similar in that both started in 1993 and both have cult followings, and both generally use smaller performers than the major companies in their respective country. The heel trio came in wearing blue World Order Japan t-shirts, which they've been wearing for the past 2 months on their cards in Japan as well. The heel group is known in Japan as Kaientai, and these guys can really work. Fans threw streamers into the ring as a sign of respect for the guys, and Sasuke in particular got a nice reaction. Yakashiji subbed for injured Gran Naniwa, and was actually better than Naniwa would have been, although some fans chanted Power Ranger at him. Styles actually mentioned my name, and didn't even set a bonfire to burn an observer, and Mike Johnson of Wrestling Lariat for helping him with background of the match, and he came off well versed. He got in a knock at WCW announcers when mentioning that Sasuke had beaten Ultimo Dragon to win the J Crown, and correctly pronounced Dragon's name, and said he's also called Ultimate Dragon, pronouncing Dragon Americanized instead of the proper Spanish pronunciation by WCW announcers incorrectly, I might add. Suffice to say there were so many great moves in this match it would be hard to keep track. There was only one missed spot, when the heels did a triple powerbomb on Yakashiji, which wasn't missed. They went to do the same move on Sasuke, and there was a miscommunication, and they had that embarrassing time stand still problem the first time, and when they went back to the same spot to get it right, it was done half-hearted by Sasuke. Hamada was incredible with fast Wakigatami, Fujiwara armbar, takedowns. Fans chanted "Who" as they chopped each other hard back and forth. At one point Sasuke did a half crab and Taka escaped, and wound up doing an Enzudri. Teo, also called Terry Boy, his old ring name in Japan, did a funk spinning toe hold. Sasuke did his Osai moonsault. Taka did a springboard plancha. Teo planted Yakashiji with a great swinging DDT. He used a choke slam turned into a powerbomb. Hamada did an incredible swinging DDT for a near fall and a Frankensteiner off the top. Yakashiji came off the top with a swinging head scissors a la Rey Mysterio Jr. and followed with a tope. Taka used a springboard dropkick to Sasuke's back for a big pop and hit his Michinoku Driver 2 finisher. Sasuke made a comeback with a K-Brata, a power bomb, and finishing it up with a tiger suplex on Taka. The fans gave them all a standing ovation. 4.5 stars. Between matches they aired a taped Stevie Richards promo basically talking about being a loser all his life. It was very much unlike a typical Richards promo and was very well done. Hey, I even wanted to cry when he talked about being picked last in kickball as a kid. The interview was so good. 4. Shane Douglas, Troy Martin, pinned Pitbull number 2, Anthony Durante, in 2043 to retain the ECW TV title. Lighting was horrible early in this match. Douglas did a pre-match promo talking about going to Cartoon Land and saying he calls out guys from other promotions who don't have the balls to answer his challenge. It's too bad that was followed was a match that the two guys he calls out, Shawn Michaels and Ric Flair, who he didn't mention by name on this show, can beat blindfolded with a crippling fever. The two guys worked hard, but this was bad match made worse by how long it went. They tried to tell a story with each working on the other's neck, but it just didn't get over. Crowd was dead for most of the match except for a few gimmick spots. At one point Douglas did 3 pile drivers in a row on Pitbull while the fans chanted "She's got herpes" at Francine. Pitbull threw Douglas through a table. Gary Wolf, who was at ringside in a neck brace, hopped the rail and began attacking Douglas but was carried off by the Riot Squad. See later angle. The fans began chanting "We want blood." They brought a guardrail in the ring and Douglas tried to crutch Pitbull on it, but the guardrail fell over in the middle of the move, which killed everything. Douglas went with headbutts to the groin and threw the guardrail over the top rope onto Pitbull. He went to crotch him again on the rail outside the ring but missed that spot as well. At this point there were heavy boring chants. Pitbull made a comeback, but his punches looked terrible. Fans were now chanting "She's a whore." They went to near falls using the title belt and a ring bell. Pitbull, who appeared pretty blown up by the latter stages of the match, recovered with a stretch bomb for a near fall. Candido hit the ring but Pitbull decked him, but was then distracted by Francine and Douglas did a schoolboy for a near fall. Douglas then hit the belly to belly for the win. After the match, a guy who was walking to look like Rick Rude but obviously wasn't, came out in an old Rick Rude robe. He kissed Francine, who passed out. Douglas attacked him and went to unmask him while the real Rude, who was at ringside all along as part of the Riot Squad, took off his helmet. Douglas pulled the mask off, revealing his tag partner Brian Lee. Rude punched Douglas and Lee choke slammed him. 3/4 star. 5. Taz Peter Cernurka beat Sabu Terry Brunk in 1749. Taz dominated early with mat work and viciously cross-faced Sabu a number of times. Sabu may have broken his nose and it may have been a planned spot to get over the stiffness of the match, although one live report was that they believed Sabu bladed his nose to get the blood. Sabu came back with his leap off the chair, springboarding off the top rope with a plancha over the guardrail, and the two brawled in the crowd. Sabu missed a move and hit his ribs on the guardrail. Taz did some UFC spots with Sabu but it didn't seem to register with the crowd, and when he maneuvered into the armbreaker, the crowd didn't react at all. Although the fans seemed into the match big time as they were intensely watching, it came off as dead because of lack of noise compared to the wildly enthusiastic crowds at WCW shows. Sabu came back doing flying spots including a somersault leg drop off the middle rope and threw a chair at Taz. Taz dropped Sabu's face on the chair. Sabu missed a chair springboard spot and Taz suplexed him overhead over the guardrail while both were on the floor. At this point Bill Alfonso started his turn on Taz, but it was so subtle, nobody saw it. Sabu went for a spinning DDT through a table and Taz blocked it and Sabu went through the table himself. Alfonso began cheering for Sabu to come back, although Styles called it as him taunting Sabu. Taz sold his shoulder at the same time, apparently legit, although the injury wasn't serious enough that he's expected to miss any dates. The two traded suplexes, with Taz throwing a head and arm suplex and a front chancery suplex while Sabu came back with a Taz-like T-bone suplex and Sabu used Taz choke on him. Taz broke it up, back suplexed him on his head, used the T-bone suplex and got the submission with a choke. Fans were pretty stunned to see Sabu submit at the end. Taz got on the mic and said it was the fight of his life and that Sabu had no quit in him. Fans, at the least the vocal ones, seemed disappointed in the match and were booing Taz for praising Sabu, causing Taz to have to shout down the hecklers who were saying something to the effect that his speech was insincere storyline, not saying it nearly that eloquently, I might add. Both shook hands and hugged, and both were heavily booed at this point, I'd guess because they spent more than 1 year building up how much they hated each other, and then they hugged after the first match, which was a good match to be sure, but to some people, anything short of match of the year would be a disappointment after all the hype. Rob Van Dam hit the ring and jumped Taz and began arguing with Sabu. Taz was about to destroy Van Dam when Sabu jumped Taz and the two of them kicked the hell out of him, starting the double turn. After an Arabian facebuster, Sabu went for a springboard on Taz through a table. The spot looked terrible because Taz didn't take enough of a beating to warrant laying there for so long, and then Sabu lost his balance on the ropes and blew the spot. Taz had to lay there even longer at this point while Sabu set up to do the same spot, and this time didn't even try the springboard, but kind of used his knees on the ropes so he wouldn't fall off, and they went through the table. Alfonso then ripped off his orange Taz shirt to show underneath another Taz shirt. It took him forever to get the second shirt off to reveal the Sabu shirt underneath. The angle is that Alfonso bet all his money on Sabu winning the match, and he'll now manage Sabu and Van Dam as they feud with Taz and Condito. This entire show was scripted 8 weeks ago and sent to Request TV for approval, so this double turn idea was formulated and completed long before WWF did the same thing in the Hart-Austin match. Alfonso kind of blew the mic spot to explain why he did it. Van Dam then said how much he loves to work on Mondays, again building up his eventual WCW leaving as a way to get heat as long as he sticks around. Taz mat work was really good and Sabu did his signature flying spots and was less sloppy than usual. 3¼ stars. 6. Terry Funk won the Triangle match to earn an ECW title shot over Stevie Richards, Michael Manna, and Sandman, James Fullington. Beulah and Dreamer came out for commentary eliciting a show your tits chant. Sandman broke 2 beer cans over his head before the match started, so he was already bloody. Actually, it was 3. He offered the 3rd beer to Funk, who wouldn't take it, so he guzzled it and slammed it on his own head. I don't know where the gimmick begins and ends with Sandman, but he seems to live it totally, and he's going to hurt someone seriously if he goes into the ring loaded doing all these dangerous stunts. This was a stiff and dramatic garbage-style FMW match. Sandman brought in a ladder and they did all kinds of ladder spots on each other. At one point Funk climbed to the top rung of the ladder and did a moonsault, which actually almost totally missed Richards, but he grazed him and Richards sold it huge. Funk can get away with things like that. They did all sorts of seesaw spots with a ladder, at one point blowing a seesaw spot and the ladder flew into the crowd. That could have been a potential disaster because something like that was exactly what the people who didn't carry the show were fearing they'd wind up doing, but fortunately nobody in the crowd was hurt. A few seconds later you could see a semi-frantic Todd Gordon going around the ring to where the ladder went off camera to check things out. Richards and Sandman climbed the ladder and Funk staggered into it, knocking it over, and both took the top rope on their throat. Funk airplane spun the ladder, knocking Richards down once and Sandman down several times. Sandman came in with a garbage can with a metal sheet around it and they did spots with those objects. Styles was putting over the style of this match, saying not to settle for imitations, and if you don't know what I mean, watch TV tomorrow night and you'll find out, in reference to the WCW show in Philadelphia. Should mention that the BWO has a new member of the entourage, actually introduced a few weeks ago, a Rodman knockoff called Thomas the Inchworm Rodman. Finally Sandman and Funk did a double power bomb on Richards and pinned him in 15:43. Sandman went under the ring to pull out barbed wire, which was actually all caught up in from the streamers in the Michinoku match. Funk whipped Sandman with the barbed wire. Sandman wrapped himself in the barbed wire and began body-blocking Funk, who by this time was bloody from the side and the head. Sandman went for a leg drop off the top, which was so sloppy it looked like he was going to break his own leg on the landing. Funk put a garbage can near Sandman and pounded him a little and then gave him a moonsault for the pin. 4 stars. 7. Funk pinned Raven, Tot Levy, to win the ECW title in 7:20. Funk was bleeding like crazy from the head at this point. Raven gave him a drop toe hold with his face landing on a chair. The doctor came out to stop the match, but Funk begged to let him continue. Fans chanted for Dreamer to save Funk, but Dreamer said he gave his word and the fans don't understand what that means. Raven put Funk through a table with a running plancha to the floor. Raven then punched the doctor, Mark Allen, who I believe is his roommate in real life. He then attacked the ref. A whole bunch of Hell's Angels types showed up and stacked tables near the broadcast position while Reggie Bennett hit the ring. She was supposed to powerbomb Funk, but she isn't used to working with 250-pound men and dropped him. Funk was selling as if he was near death the entire match. Raven got on the house mic and said to Dreamer that he was going to put Funk through all the tables. At this point Dreamer got up, but Big Dick Dudley showed up with style saying he was out of prison, which is where he's been the past few months. Dudley went to choke slam Dreamer through the tables but Dreamer blocked it. Dreamer was supposed to choke slam Dudley. The spot looked terrible in that Dreamer didn't get Dudley off his feet and Dudley obviously jumped off the ledge through the 3 tables, which got the biggest pop of the show for the fall from the highest height through the most tables of the night. Dreamer hit the ring, had a short brawl with Raven and DDT'd him. Funk covered Raven, who kicked out. But the bell ringer blew it and rang the bell anyway. Funk then inside cradled Raven, and the ref counted the fall and the bell rang again. Under normal circumstances, this would have been so anticlimactic because of the bell ringer screwing up, but things were at such a frenzy at this point that it was okay. The place went nuts with fans hugging Funk as the show went off the air. 3¼ stars. Just 24 seconds after the show went off the air, the generator blew and all power for television went off. Had this happened 5 minutes earlier, it would have destroyed the climax of the show. Heyman along with Funk, Dreamer, Eliminators and a few others got in the ring and thanked the crowd in the ring in a short speech. The pro wrestling debut of Naoya Ogawa, a national sports hero in Japan for being the country's #1 heavyweight judo player for much of the past decade, was considered a major success. The April 12 Tokyo Dome, the show originally added to the schedule because of the belief it was going to be the largest gate in history almost automatically with a Shinya Hashimoto vs Ken Shamrock IWGP title main event. Ogawa was to debut on the undercard. The show changed its face with Shamrock signing with WWF and Ogawa moved to the main event. While Ogawa's name wasn't as strong with the ticket-buying pro wrestling fans in Japan as Shamrock's, he was far better known to the general public. New Japan garnered tons of mainstream publicity which led to a crowd announced at 60,500, which everyone was thrilled with since the show's advance wasn't promising at all. This would probably be a gate around $5 million which will make it wind up as almost surely the second biggest money show of 1997 behind only the January 4th Dome show when it comes to total revenue. The show wasn't sold out but was fairly close to capacity, and we're told that announced figure sounded about right. More than 50 magazines and 250 press photographers covered the main event, and a photo of the finish appeared in color on the front page of a few sports newspapers the next morning. Stories of Ogawa training with Antonio Inoki and Satoru Sayama for his pro wrestling debut ran daily in many newspapers all week leading up to the match, and it spurred enough general public curiosity interest that the television show airing on tape the next afternoon with the main matches from the Dome drew a 13.0 overall rating. Hashimoto vs. Ogawa itself drew a 13.6 rating, making it the highest-rated pro wrestling television show in Japan in many years. Ogawa used the same choke sleeper that was his main finisher in winning 7 national titles and 3 world titles in judo in what was billed as a martial arts match in 9:25, and referee Masao Hattori stopped the match. This was a disputed finish in that Riki Choshu and Kensuke Sasaki immediately hit the ring screaming that Hashimoto hadn't tapped out. Ogawa then and Inoki at ringside. Hashimoto then after the match asked for a rematch, putting up his IWGP title, which will headline the May 3rd Osaka Dome show. Hashimoto also requested to be pulled off the house show schedule for April so he could train uninterrupted for the rematch. For those interested in what would have happened trivia, the plan originally if Shamrock was there was for Hashimoto to pin Shamrock on this card, but for Shamrock to capture the title in the rematch in Osaka. It was pretty well known by insiders that Ogawa was going to win the non-title match to set up the title match, and put him on the map from the start of his career as a big-time player in Japanese wrestling. Ogawa, now 29, was the youngest world champion in the history of judo at the age of 19 in 1987. He followed it up with world title wins in 1989 and 1991. In 1992, he won the silver medal at 209 pounds at the Barcelona Olympics losing to Russian David Kakalashvili, who currently works for Rings and is the current heavyweight world champion in Sambo. He placed 5th in the Atlanta Olympics in 1996, and officially retired from competitive judo last September and began negotiating first with All Japan which didn't come close to meeting his money figures, and later New Japan, which did, to go into pro wrestling. There was great intensity in the match since New Japan wrestlers Choshu Sasaki, Satoshi Kojima and Takashi Iizuka were all in Hashimoto's corner doing the gimmick of representing their world champion in the battle against the top judo star in the country, who had Inoki in his corner, which guaranteed heat. It's the gimmick the New Japan promotion has specialized in almost from the inception of the company, and really the direction WWF should have taken Shamrock, as the outsider challenging the champion of the WWF, for maximum initial impact and value. The wrestlers were screaming at Hashimoto to throw kicks, which he did, but Ogawa snatched him in a cross-arm lock and Hashimoto made it to the ropes. Hashimoto came back with hard chops and thigh and chest kicks, but Ogawa caught a kick and took him down going for an arm lock, but Hashimoto escaped. Hashimoto, who was a high school champion in judo before getting into pro wrestling, did some judo spots of his own, but Ogawa ended up on top in his game, catching the arm again, and Hashimoto again went for the ropes to break it. Hashimoto unloaded with the hard kicks and finally knocked Ogawa down past the 6 minutes mark and did his chops to the shoulder and kicks to the stomach, and Ogawa rolled out of the ring. Hashimoto got his trademark bloody nose at this point. Hashimoto unleashed more kicks and knocked Ogawa down for a count of 7. Ogawa made the comeback using a judo throw, which will become his trademark pro wrestling winning move called the STO, Special Tornado Ogawa, and clamped on the sleeper with the body scissors on the mat for the finish. The match was said to have been successful in that it accomplished what it set out to do: appear believable and come off real looking, and get Ogawa over to set up his career and the impending rematch. Obviously Ogawa in his first pro match didn't have a classic good match. In other results: 1. Hiroyoshi Tenzan beat Manabu Nakanishi in 1429 with a diving headbutt and a variation of a Boston Crab submission, said to be so-so. 2. El Samurai pinned Shinjiro Otani in 1351 with a reverse DDT and pin, said to be about what you'd expect from these two. In other words, really good. 3. Chris Benoit, with Woman in his corner, pinned Kevin Sullivan, with Jacqueline in his corner, in 9:17 after a headbutt off the top rope. Fans didn't get into this match at all. 4. Kojima and Junji Hirata beat Kazuo Yamazaki and Osamu Kido in 10:18 when Kojima pinned Kido after a stretch bomb, said to have been okay. 5. Shiro Koshinaka pinned Takashi Ishikawa of the Ishikawa Eka promotion in 11:16 with a flying butt bump, said to have been disappointing. 6. Jushin Liger pinned Great Sasuke in 2008 to retain the J Crown, said to have been really good. They did a major angle after the match where Liger and Sasuke were in a room talking to reports about the match when the Kaientai heels, the heels in the match at ECW plus Hanzo Nakajima and Shoichi Funaki, jumped both of them. The angle wound up with Liger and Sasuke agreeing to form a tag team to battle Kaientai. Kaientai then got New Japan's Koji Kanemoto and Otani to join their side in the feud. 7. Antonio Inoki beat Tiger King Satoru Sayama in 6:46 by submission with the Cobra Twist. This would make the first job Sayama has done since his comeback and the first job since the 1970 Sayama would have done in New Japan rings. Said to have been a so-so match. 8. Great Muta pinned Masahiro Chono in 14:09 after a moonsault. However, after the match, Muta shook hands with Chono, keeping the storyline going as to whether or not Muto/Muta is going to wind up joining the NWO. 9. Choshu and Sasaki captured the IWGP Tag Team titles from Tatsumi Fujinami and Kengo Kimura when Choshu pinning Kimura in 15:39 with a lariat. Said to have been a good match. 10. Ogawa beat Hashimoto. At press time, what has been announced for the May 3rd Osaka Dome besides Hashimoto vs Ogawa for the title is Choshu and Sasaki defending the tag titles against Nakanishi and Kojima. Tokumitsu Ishizawa, Inoki's protege who has been studying Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, versus Kazuo Yamazaki, Koshinaka versus Kimura in a grudge match and a 10-man match that should steal the show with Sasuke and Gran Hamada and Samurai and Norio Oniga and Super Delphin versus Kanemoto and Otani and Dick Togo and Men's Teo and Nakajima. There will be 5 other matches on the show, and appearing from WCW will be Sting, Lex Luger, The Giant, Rick, and Scott Steiner, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall 6, Marcus Bagwell, Scott Norton, and Imposter Sting. The matches involving the WCW wrestlers weren't announced at the press conference because New Japan and WCW haven't come to agreements on exactly how the wrestlers will be used. The general belief is that the Osaka Dome show will be an easy sellout because it's the first pro wrestling show in the new building and the biggest show ever presented in that city. Although the most famous pro wrestler versus judo matches were the 2 worked 1976 matches and the 1979 rematch between Inoki and former Olympic gold medalist Willem Ruska of the Netherlands, Japanese mat history lists the first pro wrestling versus judo match in 1921 with pro wrestler Ad Santel, noted as one of the all-time hooking, submission masters and later the submission coach for Luthez, facing Hiko Shoji, a Japanese judo champion, in a match that ended in a draw which was likely also worked, but going back that far there is probably nobody alive that knows for sure. In news that has been expected ever since the buy rate for the March 28th EFC pay-per-view show came in so low, Battlecade officially announced on April 14th that was folding operations. Battlecade is kaput, it is out of business as of today, said Donald Zuckerman, the co-owner of the company, in an interview with Valley Tudo News. Whatever hope there was of raising capital after Penthouse pulled out due to the last 3 shows all being money losers, and it was known in advance that if the March 28th show failed to make a profit, it was history, ended when Request TV officially announced it wouldn't carry the proposed July 11th return date. Request made the decision to not carry EFC, because with TCI and so many other major cable distributors, including most recently Jones Cable, deciding not to carry future NHB shows, coupled with a weak buy rate, Request felt it wasn't worth it. The decision wasn't made based on Request backing off the genre as much as systems that weren't carrying it and a lack of buy rate. Request carried a commercial for the May 30th UFC pay-per-view over the weekend, placing it right at the conclusion of the ECW show, so it isn't pulling out of UFC. Zuckerman claimed the last show had 45,000 buys and that you couldn't run a profitable pay-per-view show on 45,000 buys, although insiders claim the real figure was 19,000 buys, making it a major loser. In the story, Zuckerman blamed UFC promoter Bob Marowitz for the media frenzy in January, stemming from a series of articles in the New York Times and other media in New York which set the ball in motion for what may ultimately spell temporary doom of the sport. Zuckerman claimed that Marowitz had bragged to the New York Times about hiring lobbyist James Featherstone, paying him $48,000 plus expenses to get the bill passed that put UFC under athletic commission jurisdiction in New York, thus legalizing the events. Zuckerman claimed that when Marowitz told this to the Times, the newspaper embarrassed the legislature, which saw the legislature make an abrupt flip-flop. Semaphore Entertainment Group, the parent company of UFC, had blamed Zuckerman for scheduling the March 28th show in New York City, which caused New York Mayor Rudolph Giuliani to get involved in the anti-UFC crusade, as the catalyst for the legislature flip-flopping, killing the sport live in New York and setting in motion a series of domino effects climaxed with the TCI pullout. Future NFL Hall of Famer Reggie White of the Super Bowl champion Green Bay Packers signed to appear on the May 18th WCW Slamboree pay-per-view show in Charlotte, North Carolina to face Steve McMichael in the semi-main event on the show. WCW had been negotiating with White on and off probably since January, when Kevin Green suggested to White they form a tag team. The plan for a long time was for the two to work as a tag team with Jeff Jarrett to face Ric Flair and Roddy Piper and McMichael in the main event in Charlotte. The logic of that apparently fell but one as they realized Flair, Piper and Green in Charlotte needed to be teammates since all would be huge babyfaces in Charlotte. At one time it appeared the deal for White looked to be dead since White's asking price was $500,000. But WCW is generating huge money these days and a star of White's caliber guarantees lots of mainstream publicity, particularly in May when sports news is at a slow period. Eric Bischoff put the deal together to get White to appear at Slamboree last week, and the news broke on April 10th. And it was carried on April 14th nationally through the AP wire. White debuted that night at the Live Nitro from Philadelphia, the city he played most of his career in as a member of the Eagles before joining the Packers after going through free agency and making a multi-million-dollar contract. White is a longtime wrestling fan, having followed the old NWA shows at the Philadelphia Arena in the days of Dusty Rhodes and the Four Horsemen, and has been considered at various times in the past of doing something in pro wrestling. He has also been friends with Doug Furness for probably 15 years since the two were college teammates at the University of Tennessee. White joins Green, an NFL star with the Carolina Panthers, and Dennis Rodman of the NBA's Chicago Bulls as superstar pro athletes who will work in the ring for WCW over the next 3 months. It was announced during the show that White had signed for Slamboree, and White was at ringside for most of the show. After his match, McMichael actually began heavily praising White, but said he'd beat him in their match, and it wound up with White hopping the guardrail, charging the ring and tackling McMichael before the two were pulled apart. The Nitro show in Philadelphia drew the second largest crowd and gate in the history of the WCW promotion, and devastated the all-time merchandise record. The sellout crowd of 16,256 at the Core State Spectrum, which was largely sold out a week in advance, although due to the typical weekly seating screw-ups from the earlier site surveys, several hundred tickets were put on sale at the last minute. Paid attendance was 15,132, a few hundred shy of the company record 15,834 paid at the Nitro on January 20th in Chicago. The gate of $219,816 fell just below the company record of $224,660 set for last year's Halloween Havoc pay-per-view show with Hulk Hogan vs. Randy Savage on top. Total merchandise sales was $143,000. Which broke the record of $107,000 set at the aforementioned Chicago Nitro. Some, if not all of those records, will be broken for the Nitro tapings on June 9th in Boston, the Fleet Center. Buoyed by a tremendous job of local promotion including working with the Cam Neely Foundation and sending Ric Flair, the Giant and Gene Okerlund into town for a press conference, Public and media appearances. WCW set its all-time company record for first-day sales on April 10th, selling approximately 10,000 tickets for in excess of $170,000. As of the close of business on April 14th, the advance was 13,789 tickets sold for $217,242. The way they have the Fleet Center set up for the Nitro leaves only 800 tickets left unsold. However, they may change the setup and could probably get as many as 4,500 more seats, which would no doubt sell easily, being that they have nearly 8 weeks left to sell them. While a lot of the turnaround in WCW when it comes to house show business has to be credited with the success of Nitro making it the hot promotion in the country, and also to several angles that got people back into going to matches, and as mentioned here many times, and it's largely been not given its proper due. But you can trace the house show turnaround to the Ric Flair-Randy Savage angle involving Elizabeth in January 1996, and the Hogan-Hall-Nash NWO took it to the next level. It also can't be emphasized enough what a great job WCW has done of local promotion, something the company in the past had a tradition of doing poorly, most of which is headed by Zane Bresloff's awesome promotions out of Denver. In the list of people that WCW got from WWF when it comes to importance to the company, with the exception of Hogan, Bresloff has been as if not more important than any of them when it comes to the turnaround in house show business. Hulk Hogan did a rare clean job for promoter Jacques Rougeau Jr. on the April 11th WCW show at the Molson Center in Montreal, which drew an estimated 9,000 fans and $209,000 Canadian. Rougeau, the last active member of the family, which has been a fixture on the Quebec wrestling scene for something like 40 years, was supposed to be the hometown hero in what was promoted as a Battle of the Legends. However, the crowd was mixed, with our reports indicating Rougeau had about 60% of the fans cheering for him and Hogan had about 40%. Hogan lost clean to a small package with no outside interference in what was never advertised beforehand as either a title match or a non-title match, although the assumption all along was that it was a title match, but made clear after the finish it was a non-title match. The finish enables them to book a rematch for the title when WCW returns to Montreal, although no return date was announced in the building. It is the first pinfall job with no outside interference that Hogan has done since losing the WWF title to Ultimate Warrior at the 1990 WrestleMania in Toronto. The Piper match at Starrcade wasn't a 1-2-3 finish, and probably the last one until this coming year's Starrcade against Sting. In the semifinal, the Giant was disqualified in a Pirate match, having to wear a Pirates patch during the match against Carl Pierre Ouellet. In the other top match, billed as a battle of football players, Lex Luger, who was a starter a lifetime ago with the Montreal Alouettes of the Canadian Football League and played on a championship team there, beat McMichael via DQ. After the match, Ric Flair did a run-in and was racked by Luger. Hogan vs. Rougeau was said to be a decent match, but overall the card was said to have been a major disappointment, with the only above-average match on the show a prelim match with Jeff Jarrett beating Chris Jericho. With just one show remaining in the round-robin aspect of the Champion Carnival tournament, it has come down to Toshiaki Kawada, Kenta Kobashi, and Mitsuharu Misawa. Including the show on April 15th in Fukushima, with one show remaining on April 17th in Soka, Kawada and Kobashi finished their round robins with 19 points, Kawada with an 8-1-3 record and Kobashi with a 9-2-1 record, 2 points for a win, 1 point for a draw. Akira Tao, who led the tournament most of the way, lost matches this past week to Kawada and Stan Hansen to finish with a 9-3 record and 18 points. Stan Hansen will end up with a tie with Tao with an 8-2-2 record and 18 points, with his first 2 tournament losses coming this past week against Misawa and Kobashi. Steve Williams, with a match against Tomo Honda remaining on April 17th, will almost surely end up tied with Hansen and Tao, as he's now got a 7-2-2 record with an almost sure victory to come. This leaves the one key tournament match remaining on April 17th, a singles match with Misawa versus Johnny Ace. Misawa goes into the match with an 8-2-1 record and 17 points, so a victory over Ace would put him into a 3-way final. All Japan has never gone into the final night with a 3-way deal, and has a tradition in booking its tournaments that there is a surprise on the last day. Based on its past tradition, Ace, who was the spoiler for Kobashi reaching the finals last year by holding him to a draw on the last day, would do the same, holding Misawa to a draw and leave Misawa as part of a 4-way tie for third place with Hansen, Tao, and Williams, leaving Kobashi versus Kawada as the championship match on April 19th at Budokan Hall. However, maybe this is the year to break tradition. The remainder of the placings at press time were 7, Johnny Ace 5 and 6, 10 points, match with Misawa remaining, and Gary Albright 5 and 6, 10 points, match with Giant Kimala 2 remaining, 9, June Akiyama 3-7 and 1, 7 points, match with Takao Omori remaining, 10, Kimala 2-3 and 8, 11, Omori 2 and 9 and Honda 2 and 9, 13, Jun Izumata 0 and 13, injury forfeit most of tournament. New Japan's Best of the Super Junior tournament takes place this year from May 16 to June 5 with the championship match at Budokan Hall. The round-robin tournament is weakened this year with a lack of participation of any WCW wrestlers, which includes some of the top juniors in the world. Eddie Guerrero, who was last year's winner as Black Tiger, was the only one booked to appear originally, but he won't be able to work it because of his torn pec. The round-robin aspect of the tournament, everyone has a singles match against each other, has Jushin Liger, El Samurai, Shinjiro Otani, Koji Kanemoto, Takamichi Inoku, Tatsuhito Takaiwa, Hanzo Nakajima, Doc Dean, Robbie Brookside, Scorpio Jr. and Dr. Wagner Jr. Dean and Brookside are British wrestlers who have worked for the Michinoku Pro office in Japan, and were at the most recent WCW tapings in Disney, and also worked Nitro, and weren't impressive. Scorpio Jr. and Wagner Jr. are two headliners for EMLL, both of whom are solid but not really all that charismatic of workers. Top 2-point getters meet for the championship at Budokan. Results. April 4th Sachimilco, Promo Azteca, Katamako and Alan Stone b Gio and Neo, Nigma and Rocky Santana b Cyborg Cop and Brazo Cibernetico, Zapatista and Ultimo Guerrero and Ultimo Rebelde b Huracan Ramirez Jr. and Torero and Hitano, Zorro and Tarzan Boy and Super Electra b Los Villanos 3 and 5 and Andy Barrow, Conan and Vampiro Canadiense and Mascara Sagrada b Cien Caras and Psicosis and Pantera del Ring DQ. April 5th Nashville, Tennessee, USWA, 600 Dutch Mantle b Elijah DQ, Stephen Dunn b Tank, Brackus b Bill Dundee, USWA Tag Titles, Flash Flanagan and Billy Travis b Recon and Interrogator to win titles, Unified Title Jerry Lawler b Mike Samples, Bobby Bolton and Brian Christopher b Razor Ramon and Diesel DQ. April 5th Amsterdam, New York, New Breed Wrestling, Chip Stetson b Tom, Dreamweaver b Empire Jones, Johnny Kane 1 triangle match over HC Lock and Shotgun, Rodney Allen and Johnny Diamond b Tony DeVito and Mad Russian, Gino Caruso b Metal Maniac, Danger b Milwaukee Mauler, Jimmy Snuka b Primo Carnera 3 DQ. April 5th Bayou La Batre, Louisiana, Ultimate Championship Wrestling, 596, Tommy Martinelli b Z, Tony Sweat b Bobby Doll, Cousin Boudreaux d Mr. Wrestling 3, Dusty Wolf, Lord Humongous NCOBN, Joe Kane b Kevin Northcutt, Scott Armstrong b Bunkhouse Buck, Bob Armstrong b Al Savage. April 6th Durban, South Africa, WWF 7500 sellout, Aldo Montoya b Salvatore Sincere, Jesse Jean b TL Hopper, Flash Funk BD. Lil Brown WWF title, Undertaker Bret Hart, Ahmed Johnson b Crush, Doug Furness and Phil LaFon b Blackjacks, Hunter Hearst Helmsley b Goldust, IC title Rocky Maivia b Savio Vega. April 8th Pretoria, South Africa, WWF, Hunter Hearst Helmsley b Goldust, Ahmed Johnson b Savio Vega, Jesse Jean BD. Lil Brown Doug Furness and Phil LaFon b Blackjacks, Flash Funk b Salvatore Sincere, Aldo Montoya b TL Hopper IC title, Rocky Maivia b Sultan, WWF title Undertaker b Crush. April 9th Johannesburg, South Africa, WWF 13000, Aldo Montoya b TL Hopper, Flash Funk b Salvatore Sincere, Hunter Hearst Helmsley b Jesse Jean 1 1/2 star, non-title Savio Vega b Rocky Maivia 2.5 stars, Goldust b Sultan DQ 1/4 of 1 star, Ahmed Johnson b Crush 2 stars, WWF title Undertaker b Crush. April 9th Kawasaki, or 949 sellout, Tomohiro Ishii b Taru, Takashi Okamura b Battle Ranger, Jun Kikuchi b Ryo Maike, Norio Tadano and Michiko Omukai b Miho Watabe and Keiko Aono, Shinichi Nakano b Lance Storm, Yuji Yasuryoko b Masaaki Mochizuki, Genichiro Tenryu and Koki Kitahara and Nobutaka Araya b Koji Kiao and Tatsutoshi Goto and Nobukazu Hirai. April 9th Roosevelt, Utah, American Wrestling Federation, 700, Sandman, Kevin Northcutt, b Doink the Clown, Dusty Wolf, Navajo Kid, Sean Dakota, b Zodiac, Steve Gatorwolf, DQ, Bobby Dean b Little Tokyo, Navajo Kid won 4 corners match. April 10th Shizuoka, All Japan, 2300 sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi b Tornado, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Meet Suomomoto b Masao Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi, Gary Albright b Tamon Honda, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace b Johnny Smith and Giant Kimala 2, Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinobu Kanemaru be Yoshinari Ogawa and Kentaro Shiga, Akira Taube Takao Mori, Toshiaki Kawada be Jun Akiyama, Kanakobashi be Stan Hansen. April 11th Montreal Molson Center, WCW 9000, Nelson Velue be Suni War Cloud 1/2 of 1 star, Surgeon Martin Rollin be Jacques Comptes and Richard Charlon 1/2 of 1 star, Tiger Jackson be Little Leprechaun Dud, Jeff Jarrett be Chris Jericho 2.5 stars, Harlem Heat be Faces of Fear 1.5 star, Lex Luger be Steve McMichael 1 star, Pirate Match, Pierre Ouellet be The Giant DQ Dud, non-title Jacques Rougeau be Hulk Hogan 2 stars. April 11th Mexico City Arena Mexico, EMLO, Tigre Canadiense and El Texano and Brazo de Plata be Foreign Exchange and Mano Negra and Kevin Quinn DQ, Dandy and La Fiera and Ultimo Dragon be Bestia Salvaje and Felino and El Hijo del Santo, Steel and Dr. Wagner Jr. and Silver King be Rayo de Jalisco Jr. and Dos Cars and Atlantis. April 11th Bronx, New York Universal Superstars of America, Musketeer be Mr. Nice, Kid Nazim be Rhino Power, Kid USA Armand be Larry Briscoe, Mike Sharp be La Raza, Demolition Axe and AJ Steele and Cousin Luke be Army Medic, Johnny Rods, and Spanish Angel and Metal Maniac, Tito Santana be King Kong Bundy, Hercules DDQ One Man Gang, Jimmy Snuka be Greg Valentine DQ. April 12th Kuwait City, Kuwait WWF, Freddie Joe Floyd be Barry Horowitz, Bob Holly be Brooklyn Brawler, Road Warriors be Leif Cassidy and Diesel, Tiger Ali Singh, Tiger Jeet Singh Jr., be Mankind, WWF title Undertaker be Vader, Steve Austin be Davey Boy Smith, Bret Hart be Billy Gunn, Ahmed Johnson be Bart Gunn, Ed Bangers be Godwins. April 12th Pittsburgh WCW 6376 sellout, Rey Mysterio Jr. be Super Calo, Conan be La Parka, Marcus Bagwell be Scotty Riggs, Jeff Jarrett be Chris Jericho, Lex Luger and the Giant 1 triangle match over Harlem Heat and Public Enemy, Diamond Dallas Page be Kevin Nash. April 12th Tokyo Korakuen Hall, All Japan, 2100 sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi be Johnny Smith, Masao Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi be Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota, Yoshinari Ogawa and Tamun Honda and Akira Taube Tornado and Giant Kimala 2 and Gary Albright, Stan Hansen be Takao Mori Jun Akiyama and Kentaro Shiga be Mitsuharu Misawa and Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Steve Williams be Johnny Ace, Kenta Kobashi d Toshiaki Kawada 30 minutes. April 12th Amarillo, Texas, USWF, 3500, HWT Tourney First Round, Paul Buntello be Derek McGill, David Davis be Philip Priest, Gary Neighbors be Ben Flores, Evan Tanner be Mike Kennedy, non-tourney Tony Hernandez be Din Ho, David San Miguel be Jared Dolphin, Hossein Kalami d Marcus Chacon, Juan Hernandez be Kumars Rizai, tourney semifinals Buntello be Davis, Tanner be Neighbors, Bruce Pierce be Tim Campfield, Eric Valdez be David Swaim, Lisa Hunt be Donna Coffin DQ, Gene Leidick be Butch Cagle, Heath Herring be Chris Gillian, Tanner be Buntello to win tournament, Diego Acosta be Johnny Armijo, Ali Elias be Tim Morris. April 12th Cherry Hill, New Jersey, NWA Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl 1000, Ray Odyssey and Inferno Kid be Adrian Hall and Twiggy Ramirez to win U.S. Tag Title, Mr. Puerto Rico be Steve Corino, Black Scorpion, Rick Ratchet be Donnie D. Deviously, Tommy Gilbert be Ian Rotten, King Kong Bundy be Don Montoya, not title, Lance Diamond 1 title in triangle match over Cheetah Master and Reckless Youth, Marty Jannetty be Harley Lewis, NWA title Dan Severn DDQ Dory Funk, Icon 1 Battle Royal Doug Gilbert be Buddy Landell, Flash Funk be Ace Darling, Goldust be Derek Domino. April 12th Memphis, USWA, 400, losing team splits up, Recon and Interrogator be Flash Flanagan and Billy Travis, Stephen Dunn be Brackus DQ, Tank be Bobby Bolton, Mike Samples be Steve Boz, USWA tag titles, Shooting Stars be Recon and Interrogator, Dutch Mantle be Ox Brody DQ, USWA title, Brian Christopher be Razor Ramon, Unified title King Reginald be Jerry Lawler to win title. April 12th West Islip, New York, Universal Superstars of America, Musketeer be Mr. Nice, Tommy Furia be Mike Sharp DQ, Cousin Luke be Metal Maniac, Army Medic and Larry Briscoe be Kid Nazim and AJ Steele, Kid USA Armand be Spanish Angel, Demolition Extra One Man Gang, Tito Santana be Hercules, Jimmy Snuka be Greg Valentine DQ. April 12th Ichinoseki JWP, Candy Akutsu be Sari Azumi, Hikari Fukuoka be Boyoshoy Kid, Kanako Matoya and Tomoko Kuzumi be Tomoko Miyaguchi and Devil Masami, Rieko Amano and Mayumi Ozaki be Plum Mariko and Cutie Suzuki, Azumi and Miyaguchi and Borishoy and Dynamite Kansai be Matoya and Akutsu and Kuzumi and Fukuoka. April 12 Shinza, All Japan Women, Miyuki Fuji be Rumi Sekiguchi, Ritamata and Neni Takahashi be Saya Endo and Tani Mouse, Momoe Nakanishi be Yukishina, Etsuko Mita and Mima Shimoda be Kaoru Ito and Yumi Fukawa, Kumiko Maikawa be Yoshiko Tamura, Manami Toyota and Toshio Yamada be Genki Misae and Takako Inoue. April 12 ME, IWA, 320, Great Takeru be Yuji Makudo, Emi Motokawa be Nishibori, Tutor the Turtle be Akinori Tsukioka, Keizo Matsuda be Akihiko Masuda, Katsumi Hirono and Daiko Kubo Benkei be Masao Orihara and Leatherface, Rick Patterson, Hiromichi Fuyuki and Gedo and Jado be Takeshi Sato and Keisuke Yamada and Great Kabuki. April 12 Cleveland All Pro Wrestling, 275 Sellout, American Patriot be Sniper, Canadian Bad Boy be Michael Brown, Tower of Doom be Beast, Gorgeous George 3 be Viper, Tommy Rich and KC Blood be JT Lightning and Johnny Walker, Madman Pondo be Ox Harley. April 13 Kanazawa, All Japan, 3,800 Sellout, Tsuyoshi Kikuchi be Yoshinobu Kanemaru, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota be Masao Inoue and Haruka Eigen and Masa Fuchi, Gary Albright be Takao Mori, Tornado and Giant Kimala 2 be Kenta Kobashi and Kentaro Shiga, Jun Akiyama be Tamon Honda, Steve Williams and Johnny Ace and Johnny Smith be Yoshinari Ogawa and Toshiaki Kawada and Akira Tao, Mitsuharu Misawa be Stan Hansen. April 13 Odawara. Alerts, 553 Sellout, Shoichi Funaki be Alexander Otsuka, Katsumi Yujita be Takeshi Ono, Daisuke Ikeda be Minoru Tanaka, Victor Kruger and Rambo, CWA, be Naohiro Hoshikawa and Yuki Ishikawa. April 13 Yamato, IWA, Akinori Tsukioka be Yuji Makudo, Takeshi Sato be Tutor the Turtle, Emi Motokawa be Keiko Aono, Gedo be Great Takeru, Daiko Kubo Benkei be Leatherface DQ Gecko, Masao Orihara, and Great Kabuki be Hiromichi Fuyuki and Jado, Keisuke Yamada and Keizo Matsuda and Katsumi Hirono be Kishin Kawabata and Shigeo Okamura and Hideyuki Takahashi. April 13 Yamaguchi, Jia, Meiki Numao be Amami Kato, Kaoru be Numao, Sonoko Kato and Meiko Satomura be Maiko Matsumoto and Toshie Uematsu, Rina Ishii and Chigusa Nagio and Akira Hokuto be Sakura Hirota and Chikeo Nagashima and Sugar Sato. April 14 Philadelphia Core State Spectrum, WCW Monday Nitro Tapings, 16,256 Sellout / 15,132 paid, Joe Gomez and Ice Train be Ace Darling and Devon Storm. Medusa be Luna Vachon DQ Chris Benoit be Barbarian. U.S. title, Dean Malenko be Hector Guerrero, Rey Mysterio Jr. be Juventud Guerrera, WCW TV title, Ultimo Dragon be Lane Carlson, 6 be Prince Aoki at 2 3/4 stars, Street Fight Public Enemy be High Voltage 2 3/4 stars, Giant be Big Al, 911 Diamond Dallas Page be Conan, Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael be Harlem Heat DQ 1 1/4 stars, Lex Luger be Kevin Nash DQ 1/4 star. April 14 Niigata, All Japan, 3,100 Sellout, Mitsuo Momota be Masao Inoue, Rusher Kimura and Giant Baba be Masa Fuchi and Haruka Eigen, Gary Albright and Johnny Smith be Tornado and Johnny Ace, Yoshinari Ogawa and Yuhi Sano be Tsuyoshi Kikuchi and Kentaro Shiga, Stan Hansen and Takao Mori be Tamon Honda and Jun Akiyama, Mitsuharu Misawa be Giant Kimala 2, Steve Williams be Kenta Kobashi, Toshiaki Kawada be Akira Tao. April 15 Fukushima, All Japan, 1,200 Tornado and Johnny Smith be Yoshinobu Kanemaru and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi, Giant Baba and Rusher Kimura and Mitsuo Momota be Masa Fuchi and Haruka Eigen and Masao Inoue, Johnny Ace be Gary Albright, Kenta Kobashi be Giant Kimala 2, Steve Williams be Jun Akiyama, Stan Hansen be Akira Tao, Toshiaki Kawada and Yoshinari Ogawa and Takao Mori be Mitsuharu Misawa and Tamon Honda and Kentaro Shiga. April 15 Nagoya, FMW Megumi Kudo be Michiko Omukai, Ricky Morton be Shark Tsuchiya and Crusher Matamari and Miss Mongol be Kaori Nakayama and Ri and Yoko Ikeda, Mr. Ganasuke be Koji Nakagawa, Super Leather be Riki Fuji, Masato Tanaka be Hisakatsu Oya, Hayabusa be Crypt Keeper, The Gladiator be Tetsuhiro Kuroda, Wing Kanemura and Haido and Hideki Hasaka and Dragon Winger be Headhunters and Katsutoshi Niyama and Flying Kid Ichihara. Special thanks to Steve Dr. Lucha Sims, Frank Mott, Travis Edgeworth, Dan Paris, Greg Seagraves, Brian Weaver, Chuck Morris, Ken Bevan, Dominic Valenti, David Rude, Georgianne Macropoulos, James Haas, Steve Ketcher, Steve Nelson, Peggy Watkins, Tim Knoll, Oliver Hurley, Manuel Gonzalez, Ken Verrett, Eddie Goldman, Jesse Money. Japanese television rundown. March 30th, All Japan. 1. Yui Sano and Fuchi beat Smith and Tornado in 14:59. The last 6:15 aired on television. Sano of UWFI and now of Kingdom worked a shoot style, but since he hasn't been in the ring in nearly 4 months, his kicks were kind of slow and it didn't translate well, even though Sano was a great worker in traditional pro wrestling before doing shoot style. He didn't really work well with Smith. Finish saw Fuchi use 2 back suplexes on Tornado, then Tornado tried a spin kick but Fuchi caught it and took him down for the pin. 1.5 star. 2. Misawa drew Kawada over 30 minutes. The last 15:30 aired on television and it was an off-the-charts war and very close to a match of the year. It was mainly trading stiff forearms and kicks and beating the hell out of each other with good psychology playing to previous matches and known spots. Because they went so long, it wasn't fast-paced except in flurries and had a slow build, although they were already teasing finishes by the time the TV portion aired. Misawa held the early advantage until Kawada German suplexed him on his head. He went for a power bomb off the apron to the floor, but Misawa blocked it. Kawada instead lariated him to the floor and power bombed him on the floor. He got a high power bomb for a near fall and went with the stretch plum. After trading hard blows, Kawada tried 2 more power bombs, but each time Misawa turned it into a Hurricane Rana. Kawada continued to pound away at Misawa with stiff lariats and kicks all over the face and head and got another near fall with a power bomb. Misawa came back with hard elbows and a somersault kick and they spent nearly a minute teasing a tiger suplex. When Misawa finally hit it, Kawada kicked out. Kawada hit a rolling kick just before time expired. 4.75 stars. April 5th, New Japan. 1. This was the one-night NWO vs. New Japan/WCW deal from Tokyo Gym. Satoshi Kojima pinned Hiro Saito in 8:24 after a stretch bomb. 2 stars. Ope in 7:55. 2.25 stars. 3. Marcus Bagwell pinned Steven Regal in 7:17 with the Buff Blockbuster. Hard to rate because they only aired 2:30 of the match. 4. Kensuke Sasaki beat Imposter Sting in 4:59 with a lariat and a power strangle. Tenzan tried to interfere in the finish but Sasaki lariated him as well. NWO Sting looked pretty bad and Sasaki isn't exactly the guy you'd look for to be able to carry someone to a good match. 1/2 star. 5. Masahiro Chono pinned Keiji Muto in 9:34. Bagwell and Tenzan interfered early attacking Muto. Kojima attacked Chono as well. This wasn't anywhere close to the matches these two have had in the past, but still a good match. They did a lot of back and forth dropkick and Yakuza kick spots, which they do in a lot of their matches. Chono won with a low blow and Yakuza kick for the pin. After the match, Chono hit Muto with Imposter Sting's black baseball bat and the NWO guys with the bat held off the New Japan guys while Chono spray painted NWO on Muto's back. 3 stars. 6. Scott Norton pinned Shinya Hashimoto in 11-1 with a power bomb. This was a hard-hitting match in that the two guys chopped and kicked the hell out of each other, but there wasn't much else to it and the heat was nothing special. 2 stars. April 6th, All Japan Women. This was taped on the major March 23rd Yokohama Arena show. They aired the last minute or so of a few early matches but only gave time to the final 2 title matches on the card. 1. Kumiko Maekawa and Tomoko Watanabe kept the WWA tag titles, beating Takako Inoue and Mariko Yoshida in 2 out of 3 falls. The work was really good, but the match suffered from a lack of heat. Inoue and Yoshida opened with a double tope before the crowd was even into the match. Yoshida did her rope climb plancha to the floor. Inoue choke slammed Maekawa off the top for a near fall. There were several more near falls before Maekawa pinned Yoshida in the first fall after a kick in 4:56. Crowd picked up in the second fall, which had lots of good near falls. Inoue used her Takako panic, a knee to the head coming off the top rope, on Watanabe in 5:35. Match got really good in the third fall with more near falls back and forth. Yoshida kept kicking out of Watanabe's screwdriver. The Urnage turned into a powerbomb finisher 3 times before Watanabe finally got the pin with a version of the Splash Mountain in 15:32. 3.75 stars. 2. Kyoko Inoue retained the women's Triple Crown, WWA title, IWA title and All Pacific title, beating Asia Kong in 29-29. This was a very good match, but these two have had many better matches between them, so in some ways it's a disappointment since this was the main event on the big show of the year. It's one of those deals where after all those years chasing the belt, now that Kyoko has the belt, she isn't nearly the worker she was 2 years ago. Kong actually carried the match with brawling outside the ring, including hard chair shots and a piledriver through the timekeeper's table. Kong hit her with the table. She even did a tope and a dropkick off the top rope. There were a few clumsy spots as well. Kong used her spinning backhand, Uraken punch for a near fall, but later attempts saw Inoue block them twice. Then Kong hit another for a near fall. Kong got near falls with a power bomb and a brainbuster. Kong mainly dominated, but Inoue came back and got Kong up in the torture rack. No mean feat. Kong was on the top rope when the move started, so it wasn't like she lifted her from the ground, and then got the pin after 2 power bombs. 3.5 stars. Puerto Rico. The WWA had scheduled a tour on April 11th and April 12th with Ahmed Johnson, Hunter Hearst Helmsley and Savio Vega, but it had to be cancelled when the WWF sent the 3 to South Africa instead. Vega was scheduled to defend his WWA World Heavyweight title against Johnson on both shows. They were trying to push Johnson as a local hero by saying that his mother is Puerto Rican. Huracan Castillo Jr. captured the WWC Puerto Rican title, beating Ray Gonzalez on March 29th in Bayamon. The Bushwhackers and Muhammad Hossein, Lou Fabiano, are scheduled to come in for WWC. Doug Masters was supposed to come in but never showed up. Carlos Colon vs. Jim Steele continues as the main event feud. EMLL. The main event on the April 11th Arena Mexico show continued the build for a Rayo de Jalisco Jr. vs. Steele, Sean Morley, match for the CMLL heavyweight title. In a trios main event, Steele, teaming with Dr. Wagner Jr. and Silver King, pinned Rayo, teaming with Dos Caras and Atlantis, to win the third fall. This comes on the heels of Steele winning the Grand Prix tournament on April 4th, beating Rayo in the finals. Steele was described as someone who has the physique of somewhere between a Lex Luger and a Patriot, and even though he's green, has good potential. Another newcomer from Canada who arrived on April 11th was Kevin Quinn, who was said to look pretty good doing a Rick Rude gimmick. Yoshihiro Tajiri and Yone Jinjin from Japan should be returning soon. Promo Azteca. The first teaming of Conan and Vampiro in several years headlined the April 4th show in Xochimilco as they teamed with Mascara Sagrada to beat Pantera del Ring and Psicosis and Cien Caras via DQ when Caras fouled Sagrada, who was left a bloody mess. Black Warrior starts on April 18th. AAA. Jake Roberts returned on April 5th in Acapulco doing a run-in during the main event, which was Pero Aguayo and Latin Lover in Octagon vs. Scarecrow, said to not be an embarrassment, and Pierre Roth Jr. and Pentagon with the outside interference DQ finish. Roberts, who is working here as an indie wrestler after being fired from Titan Sports, whipped the faces until Cybernetico made the save, and wound up whipping him as well. The next major show is April 30th in Veracruz, and Triple Mania has been moved to May 30th, with no location announced. All Japan. Not much in the way of news aside from the Carnival tournament, which picked up in interest and crowds leading up the climax. The tournament matches this week were on April 10th in Shizuoka before a sellout 2,300 with Gary Albright pinning Tamon Honda in 8-0, Akira Tao pinned Takao Omori in 8:31, Toshiaki Kawada beat Jun Akiyama with a stretch plum in 17:16 and Kenta Kobashi pinned Stan Hansen with a lariat in 19:51. April 12th at Korakuen Hall drew a sellout 2,100. This show was going on at the same time as the New Japan Tokyo Dome show about 40 yards away. At Hansen pinned Omori in 10:18 with a lariat. Steve Williams pinned Johnny Ace in 20:44 after a knockout punch to the face, and Kobashi drew with Kawada over 30 minutes. April 13th in Kanazawa before a sellout 3,800 had Albright pin Omori in 4:58 with the Dragon Suplex. Akiyama pinned Honda in 14:46 and Misawa pinned Hansen with a discus elbow smash in 17:59. April 14th in Niigata before a sellout 3,100 was Misawa pinned Kimala 2 in 9:48 with an elbow drop. Williams pinned Kobashi in 23:50 with a backdrop driver, and Kawada pinned Tao with a jumping high kick. April 15th in Fukushima before 1,200 had Ace pin Albright in 11:17 with the Cobra Suplex. Kobashi pinned Kimala 2 in 13:23 with a lariat. Williams pinned Akiyama in 14:12 with a backdrop driver, and Hansen pinned Tao in 15:06 after a lariat. Yui Sano of Kingdom worked on the April 14th show in Niigata teaming with Yoshinari Ogawa to beat Kentaro Shiga and Tsuyoshi Kikuchi. April 6th television show did a 3.4 rating. New Japan. The next tour will be from April 17th to April 30th. It's a minor tour with no foreign wrestlers being imported. While cards have been announced, it's no big deal, and Shinya Hashimoto was announced for the shows and has since been pulled from the tour to get over the angle he's training hard to revenge in the title match on May 3rd. The TV tapings look to be April 17th in Nagasaki with Hirata and versus Manabu Nakanishi and Satoshi Kojima, and on April 20th. The series final on April 30th in Hakata is off television. Hirata and versus Riki Choshu and Keiji Muto. CWA promoter Otto Wands was at the Dome show and gave a speech at intermission. New Japan has a relationship with Wands as it sends its young wrestlers there for seasoning. Masahiro Chono is going on a tour of WCW at some point this year and will be gone from New Japan for a few months. April 5th television show did a 3.3 rating. Other Japan notes. Abdullah the Butcher, who at the age of 61, is probably the oldest active name wrestler in the world, returns to Japan in May for the War promotion and will form a tag team with Tarzan Goto to feud with Genichiro Tenryu. Hikari Fukuoka captured the JWP title from Dynamite Kansai on April 8th at Korakuen Hall. Kansai has some sort of injury or illness that has caused her to limit her work. She appears on all the shows in 8-man tags but doesn't spend much time in the ring. Shoichi Funaki, who is a Battle wrestler who also works for Michinoku Pro, retained his UA Mexico middleweight title on April 15th in Osaka, beating Minoru Tanaka. It appears Minoru Suzuki will return on the May 24th Pancrase show. Caught the March 28th Rings show. Whatever has been written praising Kiyoshi Tamura goes double after his match with Akira Maeda. He carried Maeda to a very heated good match, which is the first good match Maeda has been in for a long time. The one thing seeing the two in the ring together is that Maeda really had to win, because Maeda came in at a shoot 253 pounds and Tamura, even with the bodybuilder physique, was only 187, and they worked a good match with Tamura on offense most of the way, but in the end, due to the size difference and the fact Maeda is still the drawing card with this group at least until his retirement, he really did have to win this time. The magazines are even praising the match as one of the best matches of the year, which I wouldn't go quite that far. The other highlight was the knockout that Tanaka did to Todor Todorov in the opener, which was about as devastating a kick knockout as you'll ever see. USWA. All kinds of behind-the-scenes turmoil. Mike Samples quit as booker and the new booker will be Dutch Mantel. Larry Burton, who has been running the company for the past several months at press time, was expected to be leaving and moving back home to California as well. Samples and Jerry Lawler had a disagreement when Samples wanted to stop booking Bill Dundee, feeling that at the age of 57, it was time for Dundee to get out of the ring. Lawler overruled him and put Dundee back on the cards, feeling they needed to use more talent known in the area rather than fill the slots with young wrestlers. A new tag team called the Shooting Stars debuted on the April 12th television show in Memphis and won the tag team titles from Flash Flanagan and Billy Travis. Travis and Flanagan then lost at the Memphis house show that afternoon against Recon and Interrogator in a match where the losing team would have to split up. After the match, Flanagan and Travis started a feud when Travis used the framed photo of Flanagan as a kid with Lance Russell and broke it over the head of Tank when Tank tried to interfere. King Reginald won the unified title at the Memphis house show before 400 fans from Jerry Lawler when Queenie threw powder in Lawler's eyes. ECW. The Terry Funk banquet on April 12th was reported by everyone to have been an overwhelming experience, praised heavily by all as a first-class deal. Funk, who brought his entire family in, was in tears most of the way and announced he would shortly be retiring from wrestling in the United States. Beulah, Teresa Hayes, whose father is near death with cancer, broke up and said that if she were to ever get married that she'd want Funk to walk her down the aisle. A videotape of this event is already available from RF Video out of Langhorne, Pennsylvania. Dan Severn was backstage at the pay-per-view show. He talked with Paul Heyman, who was enthusiastic about bringing him in, likely to work a program with Taz. You can imagine the fireworks that would cause regarding the NWA title. Severn was asked to drop the title to Dory Funk on April 12th at basically the last minute and refused, with the two doing a double countout, claiming he wasn't given notice in advance, and that since he didn't have a deal with anyone else he didn't want to drop it. Rumors of any kind of a done deal with he and WWF are premature at this point. Sabu was the intermediary in this deal. Severn hasn't done a job in a pro wrestling ring since hitting it big in UFC in late 1994. Lots of concern since WCW had Nitro the next night and many of its people were in town. Nick Patrick and one of the members of Harlem Heat came to the building about 30 minutes before the show started. The dressing room reaction from actually several of the guys was actually to start a fight, but it was quelled down pretty quick. It's amazing that Heyman has now become the level-headed guy. Dean Malenko and Ted Petty came to the building but left before the show started. and Kevin Sullivan, Hugh Morris and Dave Penzer came after the show ended and were cordial with everyone. Gary Juster came to the building to buy a ticket, but it was sold out and he wasn't let in. Here and there. Steve Nelson's USWF drew 3,500 in Amarillo on April 12 despite the competition from the De La Hoya vs. Whitaker fight and despite Nelson, who is the group's top drawing card, not appearing on the show. The group runs something that is similar in rules to Pancrase. The crowd was said to have been shockingly educated. Actually, it was described to me that they were the smartest wrestling fans in the US, and the pops for the submission holds were as loud as for anything. In what was universally described as the best match on the show and the first women's match in the history of the promotion, Lisa Hunt beat Donna Cawthon in 7:15. Correspondent Jesse Money, who has seen matches from all over the world, said the heat during this match was as intense as any match he's ever seen, and both women received standing ovations after the match. Nelson said it went over so great that a women's match will become a regular feature on these shows. All 19 matches on the 3-hour-long show were shoots, and that the show itself was exceedingly professional. There were some people playing to the crowd before and after their matches and some things that could be called angles done. The heavyweight tournament was won by 195-pound Evan Tanner, a 2-time state high school champion, who overwhelmed the competition and beat local favorite Paul Buntella with a choke in 3 minutes. In the main event, Ali Elias beat Tim Morris. The next show will be on June 20th. Nelson has sent a letter to Ralph Gracie, who beat him in less than 1 minute on the second EFC pay-per-view show, to open negotiations for a rematch in Amarillo, which he's hoping to put together as a major outdoor spectacular sometime during the summer of 1998. Besides Cawthon, who did some pro wrestling in the 70s as Diamond Donna, the only one on the show with a pro wrestling background was former UWFI wrestler Gene Leidick, who destroyed former pro football player Butch Cagle in 2004. Leidick is hoping to get another chance to work in Japan after a contract problem ended his UWFI run. Dennis Coralizzo ran his second Eddie Gilbert Memorial Brawl on April 12 in Cherry Hill, New Jersey before more than 1,000 fans. Bill Watts and Harley Race were brought in for the show, convention and Conda. Other names involved included Tommy and Doug Gilbert, King Kong Bundy, Marty Jannetty, Rory Funk, Dan Severn, Buddy Landell, Jim Cornette, Flash Funk, and Goldust. Landell passed out after the show and spent the evening in the hospital but was okay the next day. Tommy Gilbert had to get up and leave during a tribute tape for Eddie Gilbert made by Bill Apter. People were raving about Lance Diamond, a local wrestler who was said to have been the best performer on the show and was given the group's North American title. About 600 people attended the afternoon convention. Jannetty said he was looking to get back into the WWF, but our WWF sources say there have been no talks in that direction. Coralizzo's next show will be April 26th in Woodbury, New Jersey, with Landell vs. Disco Inferno on top. Kerry McCoy of Penn State, the NCAA champion in the heavyweight division, was the winner of the 1997 Hodge Trophy as the top collegiate wrestler in the country. The trophy is named, of course, after former pro wrestling legend Danny Hodge, who was one of the best college wrestlers in the history of the nation. McCoy was 41-0 this season, including going 15-0 against nationally ranked wrestlers, and was only taken down twice all season. McCoy won 131 of his last 132 collegiate matches over the past 3 seasons. Johnny Rodz, a veteran WWF jobber of the 70s, worked some weekend shows in New York for Tommy D under the name The Army Medic. Want to thank James Boone of the Squared Circle radio show for all the recent plugs for The Observer. The show is on at 9 p.m. Pacific Time every Friday night on the cable radio network and can be heard coast to coast. Hallie Wilson has a radio show on Vogue, 970 a.m., in Jacksonville, Florida every Wednesday night at 7:05 p.m. Grizzly Smith, the father of Jake Roberts, worked in the main event on a show on April 6th in Cutoff, Louisiana against One Man Gang. Grizzly was a big name in the 60s, but I haven't heard of him working a match in close to 20 years. A wrestling show scheduled for April 12th at Chantilly High School in Fairfax, Virginia for the IPA was canceled 4 hours before show time after considerable pressure from the American Arab Anti-Defamation Committee due to its feelings about the character portrayed on television by the Iron Sheik. It's the first we've heard about an ethnic group actually getting a show canceled because a heel portrays negatively on their group. The pressure started 2 days earlier, and the promoters agreed to take Iron Sheik off the show, and they contacted Nikolai Volkov to work as a replacement. The high school and promotion were satisfied with that change, and the group started putting pressure on getting the midgets removed from the show because they were also considered a negative portrayal. None of the midgets did an Arabian gimmick. The school, due to the pressure, wanted the show canceled and did the day of the show, claiming the school felt it was inappropriate for the school to be sponsoring a show with a midget match. A women's show with some men's bouts underneath will take place on April 26th in Veterans Park in Mount Airy, North Carolina, with Leilani Kai vs. Susan Green as the main event. Through the Ropes Promotions runs April 19th in Gastonia, North Carolina, with Terry Gordy vs. Barbarian as the main event. All Pro Wrestling returns to the Pacific Coast Sports Gym in Hayward, California on April 19th. NHB. UFC is attempting to put together a Mark Coleman vs. Marco Ruas main event for its July pay-per-view show tentatively from Tokyo. The match was considered a done deal with both sides having agreed to it, but at press time there are complications and it may right now be more likely than not that it won't happen. David Isaacs is in Japan right now and they may announce the card officially sometime soon. UFC is negotiating to bring in Maurice Smith. With the folding of Extreme, UFC has a lot more than Smith, as guys like Kevin Jackson, Kenny Monday, Igor Zinoviev and Ralph Gracie and really most of the guys on the last EFC show would all make for some very interesting matchups on a UFC show. Negotiations are very close to having the first regular weekly shoot television show in Evansville, Indiana put on by Hook and Shoot Promotions. WCW. Nitro on April 14th from Philadelphia opened with 2 matches taped for broadcast later in the week. Joe Gomez and Ice Train beat Devon Storm and Ace Darling as the Extreme in a match most notable for the debut of Kimona as a valet. Kimona didn't do much or get over. Nobody was clear whether or not they called her by the name Kimona, but she wasn't given a different name. Medusa beat Luna Vachon via DQ in a short match. Then the live show began with them saying that Lex Luger wanted his title shot against Hulk Hogan on the show, but since Hogan wasn't there, Kevin Nash stepped in. Chris Benoit pinned Barbarian in 2:36 of a match with great heat. Afterwards, the entire Dungeon of Doom destroyed Benoit until Jeff Jarrett and Steve McMichael made the save. Dean Malenko kept the U.S. title, beating Hector Guerrero in 2:53. Guerrero, 40, really looked his age and then some, nothing like he did several months back when he came to Nitro and shocked everyone. He didn't show much, so the match was nowhere close to what it could have been. Eddie Guerrero, arm still in a sling, confronted Malenko after the match. Rey Mysterio Jr. pinned Juventud Guerrera in 3:24. The more these guys are treated like jobbers, the more they wrestle like jobbers. This was the worst singles match I've ever seen these two have. Crowd was dead and lots of missed moves, although the finishing springboard Hurricane Rana was out of this world. Luna Vachon did an interview that made no sense. I think that's company policy nowadays. She talked about taking the women's title belt from Medusa. Of course Medusa doesn't hold that belt. Akira Hokuto does, but with the communication within this company, I don't blame her for the mistake. I do blame the announcers for never acknowledging the interview and correcting the mistake the rest of the show. Ultimo Dragon retained the TV title, beating Lane Carlson. Minnesota indie wrestler Lenny Lane, who has worked Michinoku Pro and did a few dates in February for ECW, in 3:45 with a Tiger Suplex, called a Dragon Suplex by Tony Schiavone, who has now only had a year to figure out the difference. Carlson must be pretty bad because it's the first time a Dragon match has been this sloppy. Six beat Prince Iaukea in 5:42 with a chicken wing crossface, which he's calling the Buzzkiller 2 3/4 stars. It was the best match on Iida's show Monday night, which says something for Six, since some very good workers haven't been able to get that much out of the Prince. Ric Flair, Kevin Green and Roddy Piper did an interview. This was most interesting. To translate into reality, what they said stems from a meeting a week earlier where Kevin Nash, Bischoff, Flair and Piper were together to talk about problems with the Charlotte main event. Since Hogan doesn't want to do the pay-per-view, Flair and Piper didn't want Six as the sub in the main event, feeling with a star like Green involved that Six wasn't a big enough pro wrestling name from a main event credibility standpoint to be in such a main event position. Nash argued that given the talent in the match, that Six would be the only one who could make the match, and pretty much insulted the current age and condition of Flair and Piper in doing so and called Flair a comedy act. It wound up with Flair and Piper feeling that Nash had no respect for who they were in the business and what they'd accomplished and what they'd gone through in the old days to get there. There is still considerable heat from the uncensored pay-per-view when Nash cut off Piper and wouldn't sell for him, with the feeling that Nash didn't respect Piper's status as a legend, although Nash's side is apparently that he was setting Piper up for a spot where he would sell for him, but Piper couldn't improvise and instead began doing spots with Savage, who he trusted to make him look good. And of course Nash felt that Flair and Piper had no respect for the current stars as stars and felt the only real stars were the guys from their generation. So that explains the interview. No doubt you can figure Flair is frustrated when the company he saved, make no mistake about it, without Flair, Turner never would have bought out Crockett and the company would have been out of business completely by the end of 1989, and Carrot is paying more money to Nash than to him. But that's the reality of being in the right place at the right time. You can also say time marches on, but the reality is that Flair is probably more over now than he's been in years. Piper ranted and raved and made no sense, although he's been overexposed on television of late to the point that a lot of people are now picking up on it and he may be on the verge of losing steam in a hurry. Piper was so frustrated, mad, screwed up, take your pick, that he couldn't even say Piper's Pit or make sense trying to get over his history. Green chimed in about rookies who make big money that don't want to work hard, start practice early, stay late or study game films, so they obviously got him fired up about young guys with no respect for veterans, although Nash is like 38 years old so he's hardly a rookie. And Flair went on a strange speech about his life which at least made a semblance of sense. Flair said that in 1973, actually it was 1972, he finished wrestling camp after quitting twice and thanked Verne Gagne for letting him into the greatest sport in the world. He said that in 1983, actually it was June 12, 1982, he wrestled Dick the Bruiser at the arena in St. Louis before a sellout crowd. Crowd was 19,027 fans. And he was 35 and Bruiser was 56, actually 33 and 54. And he thanked Bruiser when it was over, since Bruiser, who in those days virtually never did clean jobs, particularly in St. Louis where he was the top draw and most popular wrestler, and that night he put Flair over clean in a 2/3 fall match when Flair was world champion, and I guess pointing out Bruiser's age since Bruiser was still a major draw when he was many years older than Flair or Piper are today. And that's when he knew he was a star in the sport. Flair must be a slow learner, because the rest of us figured that out many years before that. Then he said in 1993, actually it was April 5, 1992, he wrestled Randy Savage at the Hoosier Dome and made some comment about how Angelo Poffo wouldn't be happy with what Savage is doing now. Then he said that he'd still be a star in 2003. I don't know how people who don't read this newsletter can possibly make heads or tails out of these interviews nowadays. With 2.8 million homes turned in while that interview was taking place, those three guys did an interview for exactly one person, Kevin Nash, who was probably laughing his way through it. A lot of the wrestlers backstage were behind their backs because they all exposed a lot of insecurity. And just for the record, as of Monday night, the two sides hadn't agreed on a main event, which is why they simply announced as Flair and Green and Piper against the NWO without mentioning specific names. Public Enemy beat High Voltage in 4:37 of a street fight, which was your basic garbage can toilet seat brawl ending when Rocco put Rage through two tables and pinned him on the floor. It was also pretty good. Giant beat Big Al, formerly 911, in 59 with a choke slam of a match that would have been intolerable if it had gone any longer. Diamond Dallas Page pinned Conan with the Diamond Cutter in 2:08. Savage and Liz were cutting a promo in the crowd. Page jumped in the crowd and they scurried. Jarrett and McMichael beat Harlem Heat in a rematch via DQ in 10:02, 1 1/4 stars. Match was a lot worse than last week, probably because McMichael wrestled in this one. McMichael was about to use the briefcase but Sherry got it from him. In the post-match, Sherry was supposed to miss hitting Deborah with the briefcase, but in the follow-through of her swing, she actually clocked Deborah by accident. McMichael then did a pretty good interview setting up the pull-apart with Reggie White. Finale saw Luger beat Nash via DQ in 4:07 when the entire NWO attacked Luger in a poor match. Page made the first save but he was beaten down. Finally Sting and Giant came out and Sting had 4 baseball bats and he, Luger, Giant and Page cleaned house to end the show. Show came off as Major League and at high points, White MC Michael Angle, but couldn't touch the ECW show the previous night for quality. Beat the pants off Raw, however. Ratings were typical with Nitro doing a 3.49 rating, 3.2 first hour, 3.8 seconds hour, and 5.54 share to Raw's 2.18, 2.1 first hour, 2.3 seconds hour, and 3.31 share. Nitro Replay did a 1.7 rating and 4.0 share. Not much of note in the quarter hours. WCW was in the 2.9 to 3.0 range for the early matches until Six vs. Prince and the Flair group interview, and it was the latter, jumped a 3.0 to a 3.9. Slight dip to 3.6 for the Street Fight, Giant, and Page until a 3.8 for the Jarrett/MC Michael match, peaking at a 4.2 for the McMichael/White Angle and Luger vs. Nash match. WWF started weak, with a 1.8 for the Road Warriors vs. Godwins and 2.0 for Helmsley vs. Jesse Jam. Rocky Maivia vs. Sultan did a 2.4 for the boring first half, and lost to a 2.0 for the finish, which actually got exciting. Peak rating was 2.5 for a Steve Austin interview and Goldust vs. Sultan, and it fell from there, despite a Bret Hart interview 2.2, and replaying all the women in bikinis from the Slammies, which they promoted the entire show and meant absolutely nothing in the ratings, 2.2. There is absolutely no talk about doing that live Thursday night show on TBS, nor are any arenas booked for live Thursday tapings, as they'd have to be months in advance for planning a start. TBS offered big money for the show, but apparently common sense may win out after all, since it'll destroy the personal lives of most of the office, and a lot of the wrestlers, not to mention possibly dilute the winning Monday night formula. Weekend ratings saw main event at 1.4 and Saturday night at 2.7. Pro, which was to be the debut of Scott Hudson as an announcer, was cancelled when the Braves game went long. Hudson and Larry Zbyszko will do the show as they've pulled Dusty Rhodes and Chris Cruz. Cruz is under contract through October, but it doesn't look like we'll be seeing him much between now and then. In the WWF vs. WCW lawsuit, a Pittsburgh judge ruled that Mark Madden was a journalist and thus isn't required to reveal his sources. However, the judge also ruled that if Madden was told by his higher-ups in the company information to report that he knew was false, that his sources for that information can't be protected. Madden was also suspended by Nick Lombros from the WCW hotline for 1 week for using the phrase "say hello to the bad guy," which resulted in another nasty letter from Jerry McDevitt to WCW. Besides Montreal, the only other WCW house show of the week was April 12th in Pittsburgh, with a sellout 6,376 paying $73,704 and another $52,000 in merchandise. The whole card was screwed up due to injuries and Scott Hall being gone. By the way, Hall may be back April 21st, or if not, by April 28th. The main event wound up being Page vs. Nash, and Nash did a clean job to the Diamond Cutter. Savage on crutches. Now it looks like he'll be out for about 6 weeks, was there, and Sting did a run-in at the end of the show as a make-good due to all the no-shows. In the continuing saga of Sullivan vs. Nash, the Nash contingent is working to get Sullivan out of the ring. As many of you are aware, nearly 1 year ago Eric Bischoff told Sullivan that when the current program with Chris Benoit runs its course, that he has to get out of the ring. So Sullivan has done basically a brilliant job of keeping the feud going by using his wife, his son, Jacqueline, etc., and to give the devil his due, in the process it has been a hot feud and has taken Benoit to superstardom. But if you've noticed, the angle where Kevin's son hit him with a chair in Baltimore hasn't been acknowledged, and the pressure has been on from the other side to get Sullivan out of the ring and end the feud. The only ECW performer who came to Nitro was Bill Alfonso. There were people in WCW joking about how the same fans who do those anti-Bischoff and anti-WCW chants on ECW shows were noticeable on television at Nitro right in front of the camera, marking out for WCW bigger than they do at ECW. They're going to do some sort of Eric Bischoff angle on the April 21st Nitro, and apparently are doing an angle to get Nick Patrick back as a regular ref, as the heel ref gimmick may have run its course. WWF Raw on April 14th was taped on April 9th in Johannesburg, South Africa, before 13,000 fans at an outdoor stadium. They aired 4 matches from South Africa and 2 matches taped at the prior taping in Muncie, Indiana. The show sucked. From Indiana, Road Warriors beat Godwins in a 1/2 of 1 star match. From Johannesburg, Hunter Hearst Helmsley beat Jesse Jam in 14:54 when Honky Tonk Man, who did color, tripped and hit Jam, and Helmsley gave him the pedigree. From Johannesburg, Savio Vega pinned Rocky Maivia in 17:32 of a non-title 2.5 stars match, using the trunks to set up their title match on the April 20th pay-per-view show. Started really boring but picked up into a good bout. After the match, the Nation of Domination all attacked Maivia, including D'Lo Brown, who wrestled on the South Africa tour under that name, although he still never is referred to with the name on television, until Ahmed Johnson cleaned house with a 2x4. Goldust beat Sultan via DQ in 3:02 when Helmsley and Chyna interfered and they spike piledrove Goldust after the match. Sultan put him in the camel clutch while Helmsley pounded on him. Then Sultan pounded on him some more with a flagpole until Rene Goulet made the save. From Indiana, Mankind and Invader beat Headbangers via DQ in 5:34 when one of them blew mist in Mankind's eye. After the match, the blinded Mankind put the mandible claw on Vader, who sold it big until Paul Bearer managed to break it up. Match was a dud. Main event saw Johnson pin Crush in 11:27 with a Schoolboy in a -2 stars match. This was a worst match of the year candidate. They did nothing and were missing everything. After the match, Farouk challenged Johnson to a match, which will likely be on the May 11th pay-per-view from Richmond, Virginia, to where Johnson will wrestle Vega, Crush and Farouk, and if he beats all 3, the entire Nation of Domination leaves the WWF. Other weekend numbers saw Livewire at 1.1 and Superstars at 1.3. Vega vs. Maivia for the IC title was the only match added to the April 20th pay-per-view lineup, which also includes Undertaker defending against Mankind, Owen and Davey defending against Road Warriors, Honky's Mystery Man vs. Jam, and Bret Hart vs. Steve Austin. Free-for-all will be Sultan versus Funk. Neville Meyer, who was the highest-ranking person in the history of the Titan Sports Company not named McMahon, resigned this past week. Meyer was the co-CEO of the company with Linda McMahon. We really never heard much about him after he was hired. He was supposed to be in charge of taking the business to a new level, but nothing changed drastically, and his leaving didn't seem to even cause that much of a stir. The story on Sid is that he supposedly has a herniated disc in his back caused by straining the back while working out in the gym. The reason it was handled so clumsily on the April 7th Raw is because they literally didn't know about it as the show was going and didn't know if he'd be there or not. Apparently Sid left a message at the office over the weekend, but since nobody was there and since Raw was taped on a Sunday night, nobody knew, and he didn't think to call the building to let anyone know he was hurt. He finally talked to Vince McMahon late in the week. No word on how long he'll be gone. There is also a lot of skepticism, not limited to just the skeptical wrestlers, as to the legitimacy of this, in that people seem to be following the Shawn Michaels lead. We don't know if Sid was going to have to put Mankind over in their match, although it would make sense given Mankind was in the main event on the next pay-per-view. Sid was definitely supposed to put Bret over on the April 20th pay-per-view since Bret had put him over 3 times in a row and it was time for Bret to get the push. You can figure the skepticism out from there. The sound mixing on the April 14th Raw was worse than the darkest days of WCW. It's weird how Raw was so state-of-the-art to where commentary done live at the building and later in studio was mixed to where nobody even knew the difference. The difference in sound from the commentary done in South Africa by Jim Ross and Honky and the sound from the studio when it was re-voiced over was noticeable and came off clumsy and like an amateur production. Jerry Lawler returns to Raw on April 21st. He missed Muncie, Indiana because he worked a USWA shot in Louisville that night that he couldn't get out of, and thus also missed last week since it was taped in Muncie in South Africa and he didn't go to South Africa. Both Joe Scarpa, Chief Jay Strongbow, and Jim Myers, George Steele, have had their bookings as agents cut way back. Actually, Myers doesn't have any bookings at present. The Bret Hart appearance on The Simpsons may have been moved from April 27th to April 20th. Overall, the South Africa tour was a major success with most of the buildings packed or close to it. The Kuwait tour from April 9th to April 13th at Kuwait City drew poorly, but it was a sold show in that the local promoter bought it for a flat price, so WWF didn't lose money on the tour. The promoter was something of a mark to be seen with the TV stars from America, as the same thing happened last year, and he brought them back. Tiger Ali Singh, Tiger Jeet Singh Jr., debuted on the tour and won the 2nd annual Kuwaiti Cup, beating Leif Cassidy, Billy Gunn, Mankind and Owen Hart in the finals on April 13th. Owen made it to the finals with wins over Henry Godwin, Steve Austin, and Vader. Singh was said to have been green and out of shape, and despite the huge push on this tour, there are right now no plans to use him in the US. The idea was to use an Arab gimmick babyface for tours in places like Kuwait, Pakistan, India and that part of the world, although Singh didn't really get over. WWF claims regarding its blood policy is that it has not changed its policy regarding blood and that Steve Austin and Bret Hart decided among themselves to violate company policy and do the juice at Mania. In hindsight, it appears the thought behind doing so poorly at WrestleMania, besides doing so many pay-per-view shows diluting the big one, is that they basically had spent a year building up one specific match, and then 5 weeks before the show, that match was taken away when Shawn Michaels forfeited the title and went home, leaving them scrambling without a WrestleMania main event. The Michinoku Pro wrestlers who appeared at the ECW pay-per-view show had a meeting scheduled with Titan in Connecticut on April 15th. Despite rumors Disco Inferno is putting out, Titan sources claim there has been no talks with it. Marlena was off television because she underwent surgery recently. The April 20th New York Daily News will have a WWF advertising inset to promote the May 17th MSG and June 21st Nassau Coliseum dates. A correction from last week regarding the Venom vs. Hysteria match a few weeks ago on Shotgun. What actually happened was that in the commentary, Jim Ross mixed the two up the entire match, which is understandable since their costumes are almost identical. Venom won the match, but he was announced by Ross as Hysteria. Then Lance Wright, not Howard Finkel, announced Hysteria as the winner. I've never seen nor heard of Finkel blowing a call as an announcer, and that would have been the first, except it wasn't him. Venom was a lot like the Eliminators on the ECW pay-per-view in that during the match he did moves that were out of this world but is totally green when it comes to putting together transitions and a match. But at 19, he has a world of potential because he can do things in the ring that even Rey Mysterio Jr. can't do. A 1-hour documentary on the life of Bret Hart was among the television shows being sold at a Canadian TV conference in Toronto last week. There were discussions with Don Frye and Scott Ferrazzo, who had inquired about coming in. Doesn't appear to be any movement in that direction. Actually, I think Ferrazzo has some potential as a heel manager. The readers' pages. Bill Miller. A few key addendums regarding Dr. Bill Miller's WWF run in the 1960s. He was one of the few men ever to pin Bruno Sammartino in a singles match. It was after manager Bobby Davis tripped Sammartino coming off the ropes, unseen by the referee. When Miller first came to the WWF, it was established that he was a practicing veterinarian and liked to wrestle part-time. Accordingly, he showed up on television initially every other week. One evening, he issued a challenge to Sammartino, who immediately accepted for later in the same television show. This entire angle also happened in Pittsburgh, which in those days was part of a separate circuit. Miller delayed his entrance to the ring and emerged with Davis, who had been absent for about a year. The match was good. After the commercial break, announcer Ray Morgan said, "Good night. We may have had a world title change, and I didn't call it." Bruno had worn the belt into the ring. It was never announced as either a title match or a non-title match. The WWF board had a vote and the title was held up pending a rematch. Obviously, Bruno emerged at the end of the series as the champion. After his series with Bruno, brother Dan Miller came to the WWF and they won the U.S. Tag Team Championship, beating Cowboy Bill Watts and Gorilla Monsoon on Washington, D.C. television. They eventually lost the belts in Madison Square Garden in 2 straight falls to Johnny Valentine and Antonio Pugliese, Tony Parisi. While they held the belts, Miller Brothers headlined 2 consecutive shows at Madison Square Garden, both times facing Sammartino and Valentine, winning the first match and losing in the rematch. After breaking up the tag team, Miller was programmed against the hot new Greek star Spiros Arion, and Miller put him over in every arena. In 1966, Miller turned face. Davis brought in Prince Iaukea, later King Curtis, and was crowing to announcer Morgan during an interview with Miller and Iaukea that Iaukea was the best wrestler in the world and would beat Sammartino for the title. Miller kept protesting, "What about me? What about my brother Dan?" Davis told him to shut up, and Miller then body-slammed Davis. This was the end of Miller's run, and he ended up not only doing jobs for the top heels in the territory like Iaukea, Monsoon, and Toru Tanaka, but even marginal heels like Tank Morgan, and was even counted out in Pittsburgh against Tony Altomare. I met Miller one evening before a Madison Square Garden show. What surprised me was that the man who did boisterous interviews with great bravado actually mumbled in regular conversation. He was a very warm person and enjoyed his work with animals. Mike Omansky, Wyckoff, New Jersey. Liar Liar. I enjoyed your recent reference to Liar Liar since I co-wrote the movie. The son of the character played by Jim Carrey loves wrestling because I once did. I was present last September 25th at the Olympic Auditorium during the filming of the match between Sting and the Giant that Carrey takes his son to. He works on preparing his legal case during the match instead of enjoying it with his son. Steve Borden was totally professional while Paul White was a riot, having a great time playing to the crowd of extra, goofing around between takes and mooning us. Unfortunately, the wrestling scene was cut from the film. According to Paul White, he is either 7'0" or 7'1". Paul Guy. Los Angeles, California. Response from Dave Meltzer. On White's height in February, I was next to White out of wrestling boots and costume as he was talking with Brad Muster, whose NFL stats listed him as 6'3" 3/4", and it looked to be about 5 to 6 inches difference in height between the two. Wrestling Observer Newsletter. P.O. Box 1228, Campbell, California 95009-1228. April 21, 1997.